Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Break in the Game Show here on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. I'm Stephen Gillespie, and joining me, if you're watching us live, a very exclusive morning episode of Break in the Game here
hmm
this Thursday morning, and I am joined by none other than my good friend, my co-host, Austin Carr. Austin, good morning. How you doing, brother?
Hey, good morning, Stephen. I'm doing good. It's bright and early, but I kind of like it. It's nice. It's sunny out. Should be a good day.
Yeah, man, absolutely. I'm looking forward to being a daytime radio personality today, at least
Right.
for the live. If you're listening to us on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio, first off, thank you so much for your devoted listenership. It's much appreciated. But we are recording at a different time of day the day before, and don't worry, we're not going to be talking about stuff that's really going to change that much difference between the day and the day that you're listening. Because today, Austin, we're discussing our Eastern Conference exit interviews. So why don't
Yes.
we explain to the folks what our rundown of what we're going to be discussing for each team are?
So we're just going to be going, team by team through the Eastern Conference and giving you, where we thought they would start or where we thought they would finish the season at the beginning of the year versus where they actually did. Who their best player was, who our most disappointing player was, the coaching performance, and there was one more thing, wasn't there, Stephen?
Yeah, we're going to be the biggest looming decision coming
Yep,
up for
biggest
them the
decision.
next
That's what
year.
it was.
And then we're going to
Awesome.
close
So,
out the show, Austin, with your idea, which was the
just a team to look forward to for next year. Someone that we're excited about for one reason or another going into next season.
there we go. All right, so it's going to be a fun show. It's probably going to run a little long. So after this, why don't you head on over to anywhere that you get your podcast, look up Breaking the Game, and there you will be able to find the continued version of this episode because we're going to be covering all 15 teams. And our buddy, Mo Murphy from the Off the Ball Network, which is where we also contribute, he writes in saying, Mountain Dew and Breaking the Game. What a morning. Shout out to Mountain Dew.
All right,
If you want to sponsor the show, reach out to us offline.
Mountain
We'd be
Dew, hit
more
us
than
up.
happy to. Yep, let's hook it up. We already are sponsored by Manscaped, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit more later on. But I just want to let y'all know, go to manscaped.com, enter in promo code BTG. That'll hook you up with 20% off and free worldwide shipping, Austin.
Yes, can't beat it, man. That's a heck of a deal. Some great products. Go ahead over to Manscaped and check them out now.
Absolutely. And our other friend, Kenneth Cotterill, writes in, no Knicks talk, please, or I got to shut off the show. Kenneth, I know you're coming in hot. Plug for the group chat. We've had a heck of a Knicks conversation. Kenneth, unfortunately for you, the Knicks are a part of the Eastern Conference. We are going to be discussing them at some point on the show, but we're also going to be discussing your your Toronto Raptors. So please
Right.
tune in for the continued
Little
discussion
Freudian
on
slip there. Sorry.
that. Yeah, maybe I meant to do that. I don't know. All right, Austin. So obviously there's 15 teams. There's only two of us, so this is going to be split up a little bit unevenly today, but we'll catch up with it on the back end with the Western Conference.
hmm
But today you're going to get us started with your analysis of how the Atlanta Hawks have done this season.
Yeah, definitely. I'll go ahead and get us started with Atlanta. Going into the season, I was expecting them to make the playoffs, but I had them projected as the seventh seed, and they're in fifth, so they're doing slightly better than what I expected. Obviously, I think it's pretty easy to see who their best player has been all year. I mean, it's Trae Young. You and I both just released our All NBA teams, and we both admitted that it was a struggle to leave him off. But if he does end up making an All NBA team, I wouldn't have any gripe with it either. I think he's had a heck of a year. The real big thing for this team has kind of just been the coaching change that they made. Not to jump around too much, but their most disappointing player. I had a really hard time with this one. I'm kind of pretty high on a lot of their players. So for them to really exceed expectations for me, like they did, I guess I'll go with Cam Reddish just because of the injuries.
Okay.
I expected a big year out of him, and I hate using injuries as an excuse to be disappointed in a guy. I don't want to. I'm
Don't
not
be. That's going to
disappointed in
be
him.
that's going to be something that I'm going to bring up with a few of my guys. So don't be.
Yeah, it's just I was expecting kind of a big year from him, so I was more so disappointed that I was more so disappointed than that I didn't get to see more of him this year than with his performance. But I was looking forward to seeing what he'd do on the court this year. But the coaching job, obviously Lloyd Pierce got fired, early on in the season, and they brought in Nate McMillan. And
Yes, yes, Jeff. My mic is on. Austin, you hear me correct?
yes, I can hear you just
Okay.
fine.
Yeah.
Uh, Thanks for checking in, Jeff.
Yeah.
But ever since Nate McMillan took over this team, it's been a completely different team, and it's you and I are both big Nate McMillan fans. It's kind of what a lot of people I think expected when Nate McMillan got signed to the contract that he did, considering he's a former head coach. Lloyd Pierce and him had no real working relationship before this, and so it was just it was kind of the writing on the wall was there that Nate McMillan was going to take over this team, and they've been terrific since that point. So, obviously the coaching job that he's done has been fantastic. And then the biggest looming decision for this team, I was going to say the coaching, but I think Nate McMillan's probably, at least in my eyes, he should have won the right to, he's earned the right to be that team's head coach going forward. I think they should give him a contract. So I went with John Collins. What do they do with him? I think, when Lloyd Pierce was still there, he was ready to be out of Atlanta. Things weren't going real well, but ever since that point, it's really things have kind of turned around. You haven't heard much about that anymore. He's been their second best player, all year. He's a really, really talented guy, and he's still young. And I think it would be smart to try to figure out a way to bring him back. I don't know, especially if he's going to be a free agent. I think his trade value was probably pretty high, but they decided not to trade him. So I think you've got to do what you can to try to bring him back.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Jeff did write in. I'm so glad that he did, because my mic, for whatever reason, the audio did switch over. So thank you, Jeff, for writing in.
Thanks.
Austin, do you hold me better now?
Oh yeah, you're a little bit more clear. I mean, I could hear you just fine before though too.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I agree with a lot of what you said, especially the injury portion. I'm going to be discussing that with a couple of the teams that I'm going to be covering as well. Jeff writes in and says, there we go. Thank you again, Jeff. That's why you're the podfather, and
Right.
I'm just pawns in your game. But yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. The only pushback I would slightly give for the most disappointing player would be Danilo Gallinari would be mine, but I definitely understand the aspect of you got a hot young prospect, expecting a lot of big things for him. He wasn't available, so that would be disappointing as well. So I definitely agree with a lot of what you said. And Austin, I don't know if I explained this earlier, but we're going to kind of be alternating between each team. So you cover the Atlanta Hawks.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to spend a whole lot of time debating one way or the other. We're just going to kind of rotate through, discuss each team. So I'm with the Boston Celtics. Now, Austin, if you remember, I had them projected to be the number one team in the Eastern Conference. What do I know? Right now they're seventh in the Eastern Conference. They've dealt with losses to Jaylen Brown, who's out for the rest of the season. Kemba, Smart, and Tatum dealing with like asthma-like symptoms since he caught COVID, so that's been difficult for him. Obviously, Jason Tatum, he's the best player for me on this squad. He's on my All-NBA second team on offtheballnetwork.com, where you can go get all of your sports needs. He's averaging about 26, 7, and 4 on a 46, 39, 87 clip. He's got a PER of 21.2, 6.3 win shares. My disappointing player for the Boston Celtics has got to be Kemba Walker, because he's missed significant time again this year. He's played in only 43 games, may only play one more for the rest of their season, right? So it's kind of difficult for the amount of money that he's making, north of $30 million a year, missing a lot of time. His averages aren't too bad. 43 field goal percentage is not super high, but his 36 3-point percentage isn't terrible either. On 8.2 attempts per game, that average with the amount that he hoists up, probably not ideal for a competing team. And he is giving you 19 points per game. I understand that, but he's a defensive liability. He's not as explosive as he used to be, and he's holding up a lot of their salary cap. So he would have to be my most disappointing player for them. Brad Stevens, his coaching performance, he seems like he's kind of lost the locker room. They don't really stand out in any one area statistically when you're talking team-wise. They're about middle of the road across the board, and their defense has actually taken a major step back from years prior. And to me, their biggest looming decision, Austin, is do they hang on to Brad Stevens, because he was rumored to be, going to Indiana University. Apparently, they offered him a 7-year, $70 million contract. That's a lot of cash. I don't know if maybe with what we're seeing this season, Brown's out for the rest of the year. That might give him a little bit of a saving grace for his job, but you got to start feeling like the Celtics might be thinking about doing some major roster configuration. What do you think about that, Austin?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I actually had them fifth in my predictions. I started my way too early that we did way back when. I had them second, and
yeah,
I don't know, whatever it was, I had an epiphany because I'm looking through my rankings now from like the day before the season, and they're a heck of a lot better than I thought they were. So there were some that were way off, but Boston, like Jeff just said, Boston never really found their identity. They just kind of never really had that run of success throughout the season. It was always just kind of hit and miss. So Brad Stevens is one of my favorites. I love him, but sometimes your voice just gets stale, and your message just gets lost. So.
And Phil Jackson spoke on that too. One of his coaching philosophies is, you can't really stay in one spot for too long, or your voice doesn't carry as much weight. So maybe we're kind of seeing that, because Stevens has been in Boston for longer than I initially thought. This is coming up on like 9 seasons, man. So
right.
It's a pretty extensive run that he's had.
For a guy that they hired as the bridge to the next head coach, I think he's done pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about 3 of the last 4 Eastern Conference Finals. It's not that he's done bad. It's just that they don't seem to be progressing. They seem stale, if that makes sense.
Definitely. Good point.
All righty, Austin. So we're rolling right into the next team. You have the Brooklyn Nets. So what's your breakdown of Brooklyn?
I had them projected first going into the season, obviously with talents like Katie and Kyrie, and then when they added James Harden, how can you not expect big things from a roster like that? And they're currently in second, and it looks like that's where they're going to finish. So not too far off there. Best player for me, I would say it was James Harden when he was there. I mean, he completely changed that team. They were like a 500 team when they made that trade, and I mean, they've completely taken off since then. He's been hurt. He came back last night, looked really good. If they're all healthy, that's going to be a hard team to beat. Disappointing rotation player for me, I went with DeAndre Jordan. And just because I didn't really have huge expectations for DeAndre Jordan, but he's had an average of double-double for every year for the last 8 years. And this year he just kind of fell off. And I was just looking, he's had DNPs in 5 of the last 9 games. When before the issues with the health issues with LaMarcus Aldridge happened and he had to retire, it kind of looked like he was not even going to have a spot in the rotation anymore. And I don't think that's what they expected from him at all. So I went with him, even though, when you're in first or second place, sometimes it's kind of hard to find a guy that's really disappointing. I would say it was him. Coaching, Steve Nash, rookie head coach. I mean, what more can you ask for? The guy's been pretty much everything you'd want out of the coach of this team. They've gotten along, haven't had any real issues. We had that little 2-week thing with Kyrie there, and I think he handled it really well. He just kind of let it happen and moved on like it was no big deal. And this team's really kind of, righted the ship, so to speak, and been right there at the top of the Eastern Conference all year. And I wasn't 100% sure how Steve Nash would do as a rookie head coach with some of the egos on this team, but they've been able to put those aside and really, succeed this year. And the only thing for this team, and it's part of my biggest looming decision, is you can't hardly say it's not championship or bust this year with the way they've gone about adding guys at the, through the buyouts and the trade deadline and who's on this roster. So my only thing is if they don't win the NBA title, where do they go from here? What do they do? Obviously, Spencer Dinwiddie's been hurt, and they'll get him back next year, and that's going to be a big addition for them. But just if they win the title, I don't know, how do you keep these 3 guys all together? I guess for the long term, because obviously they're going to want to. And if they don't, where do they go from here? How do you improve on a roster that's got those 3 guys on it already?
Yeah, and that's an interesting point. But I think what also makes it more interesting is you could probably keep these guys on the same roster because Kevin Durant's getting older, James Harden be getting older by the time all their contracts, kind of come to an end, so to speak. So maybe there's a way you can get it. I'm with you on DeAndre, Jordan with being the most disappointing player. And the coaching job, I just want to touch on real quick for Steve Nash. He's got all these talented people, and you say, well, how are they not doing so well with them? Well, they've all missed extensive periods of the season. A third of the season, a quarter of the season, half of the season, if not more for some of these guys. So I think that he's done a tremendous job. So we'll roll right into the Charlotte Hornets here, Austin. Results versus expectations with this team. I mean, I had them 13th in the East, and I thought I might be a little bit generous with where I had them. But man, right now they're already in 8th place right now. And just real quick, our buddy Brooklyn writes in and says, spot on, Austin and Steven. I can't believe these 3 guys are going to be the Nets for the long haul. Nash, Coach of the Year. I think he could be, the new favorite thing to say now, right, Austin, is he can be in the conversation. I just don't think that people, one, will do it, and 2, I don't think that he's outdone guys like, Quinn Snyder, Monty Williams, or Tom Thibodeau. But
I was going to say there's another coach in the same town that is just a bigger story regardless. It's the Knicks. You can't help that. The media is going to push that no matter how good Brooklyn was this year.
Absolutely. But all right, we're going to roll into the Charlotte Hornets now. I already mentioned that I had them 13th. They're 8th. They signed Gordon Hayward. They drafted LaMelo Ball. I had Ball 3rd on my board overall. We'll see kind of how that plays out down the line. But I might surprise you with who my best player is. I have Terry Rozier. He's averaging 21, 4 and 4. Wow. He's on a 46, 39, 82 clip, 17.4 PER, 5.3 win shares. To me, his scoring, his tenacity, the way he attacks the basket, he can shoot, he moves the ball well too. He's not a bad defender either. Austin, just real quick, how do you feel about him as the best player?
It's surprising to hear you say that, but when you look at the numbers, it's really nothing too crazy. So I like it.
Yeah, and more on LaMelo Ball here in a minute. But the most disappointing rotational player that I have, my notes are a little bit jacked up, but I did have Cody Zeller as my most disappointing player because, I mean, at one point he missed 13 consecutive games. He's losing his place in the rotation. He doesn't really even fit on their current current playing style or their scheme. He only plays about 20 minutes per game, and his value over rotational player, Austin, is at a 0.5. I mean, it's not that great at all. So, a guy who was a first-round draft pick, a high first-round draft pick, now all of a sudden isn't a part of this team's future. That went into my assessment of him being the most disappointing guy. The coaching performance, James Borrego, I think he's showing how great of a coach he can be. Runs a very egalitarian style offense where everyone's involved. The ball kind of hops around a little bit. There's not one guy as the focal point. Everybody on any given night could be the guy. And we've seen that with guys like Miles Bridges, PJ Washington, LaMelo, Graham, etc. And their biggest looming decision is what do they do with Devontae Graham? Because he's a restricted free agent after this season. Rozier transfers into being an unrestricted free agent the following year, Austin. So it's kind of how many point guards do you want to keep, and can you pay them all? Because at some point, LaMelo Ball is going to be the franchise player and making big bucks underneath Michael Jordan. So what do you think of the Hornets assessment?
Spot on, like usual, like all your work, Steven, you do a great job. Miles Bridges, PJ Washington, 2 guys I think that have kind of stepped up this year. PJ Washington had a good year last year, but Miles Bridges was somebody that coming out of college I was pretty high on. And, for whatever reason, it took him a little while, but he's had some really, really big games this year for this team. And, we'll get into it a little later, but I'm pretty excited for the future of the Charlotte Hornets. And just so you don't feel too bad, I think I'm pretty sure I had Charlotte as like either 14th or 15th in the East. So I'm pretty sure it was 14. So I was right there with you. I didn't have too many expectations from this team. So coaching has been great. These young players have really come together. They need a big man though, for sure. You're right about that.
Yeah. And Zeller has shown that he can't do that. We'll see what they do with the draft and free agency because they're not really necessarily a cap strap team. They have some flexibility that they can do, Austin, but rolling right along into our vice president, Jeff Hunt, his team, and Couch Coach Live's team too, the Chicago Bulls. Let's do them right here, Austin, and talk a little bit about.
Yeah, and I'm a little bit of a Bulls fan too. I've growing up in Indiana, not too far from Chicago. So my dad's always liked the Bulls, so I've kind of always followed them too. Honestly, I was a little disappointed in how they've done this year. Looking back, I did project them to finish 10th, and they're currently 11th. So, obviously I didn't have too high expectations going into the season for them, but especially after the Vucevic trade, I expected them to be a playoff team. But, best player, Zach Levine, however you want to say it. I say Levine, everybody else says Levine, whatever. He's been terrific. 27 points per game. He actually did make my third team All-NBA team this year. So I don't know how unpopular or popular of an opinion that is, but
I respect it. I
think he's had a terrific season. Their most disappointing player is without a doubt Lauri Markkanen. His scoring drop again. He's 7 feet tall, 260 pounds, and he averages 5 rebounds a game. You can't have that from a guy that's that size. 2 years ago, he averaged 9 rebounds a game, 18 and 9. This year, he's down below 15 points and 5 rebounds a game. His shooting has struggled, which is kind of the one plus thing that he had coming out of college, just besides being 7 feet tall. And I think at the beginning of this year, it was, if Lauri Markkanen has a big year, how do the Bulls bring him back? Now it's more of why do the Bulls bring him back if they do? And is he a part of their future? And I don't think that he is. Billy Donovan, as you know, he was my pick for coach of the year last year. I kind of expected him to come in and really, turn this team around quickly. And that hasn't been the case. I'm a little down on his coaching performance this year, especially after that trade for Nick Vucevic. I expected this team to kind of take off. And I know Levine missed time with, COVID. He was out for a while because of that. So that really hurt. But I just saw all the pieces on this team and all these young guys and these high picks and figured, with the right coach coming in and the new front office that they have, that, we're going to start seeing some progression. And it just, other than Zach Levine, it hasn't been there. And, hopefully a full season next year of him and Vucevic will help. But their biggest decision going forward, I think, was going to be Lauri Markkanen, but I'd say he's gone now. I don't see why they would spend a whole lot of money to bring him back. So I would say you have to make a decision. Is Kobe White the point guard of the future for this team? He flashes from him that show you that he can do it, and then other times you're not so sure. So I think their biggest decision going forward has to be determining whether or not Kobe White is, the future lead guard on this roster.
I think that's a fair assessment too, man. And I don't really have any kickback at all. I think that was a very, astute evaluation of the exit interview for the Chicago Bulls, man. And, speaking of spot on, we're going to transition now to a message from Manscaped. And we have some breaking news. This is an important PSA brought to you by the folks over at manscaped.com. This is your pubic service announcement, Austin, and news that you've all been waiting for. The Manscaped engineering team has confirmed that they have successfully created a Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, which is now available for purchase in the USA and, yes, Kenneth, in Canada as well. The new trimmer was just released only moments ago, and we are some of the first people to get our hands on it and share the news. Join over 2 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped, like us, with this exclusive offer for you. That's 20% and free worldwide shipping with the code BTG at manscaped.com. We're some of the first people to try the 4.0. We're both blown away by the performance, and the craftsmanship and details on it are next level. Their advanced ceramic blade and skin-safe technology is so good that it almost seems as if Manscaped worked with Elon Musk's engineers to ensure that your testes are as safe as possible. What makes this trimmer different from others? It has a new multifunction on-off switch that can engage a travel lock created for people who like to travel. The Lawnmower 4.0 gives you the ability to turn on the 4000K LED spotlight on and off when needed for a more precise shave. The new trimmer even allows you to customize your trim all over through the additional guard lengths, sizes 1 through 4. And looks-wise, it's sleek with two-tone matte and gloss finish, which even features a hot foil stamped black chrome Manscaped logo. Show off that mower loud and proud. The optimized Lawnmower 4.0 is waterproof, so you can groom in the shower and not have to worry about making a mess on the bathroom floor. Did I mention, Austin, wireless charging? The Lawnmower 4.0 new wireless charging system uses electromagnetic induction, which can help the battery length last even longer. And if you're still trimming your face with your ball trimmer, it's time to make some changes. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code BTG at manscaped.com. No person wants to end up with their pubes in their mouth, and your balls will thank you. Austin, tell the folks a little bit about Manscaped.
Well, you just said a lot of big words there and a lot of, technological stuff, and that's not really my game, but it's the best product out there. It's always, they're really cool looking. It does the job. It's exactly what you need. Like Steven said, you're not going to nick yourself. They've got tons of great products, and don't be scared off like I kind of am sometimes by all those big words. Go use our 3-letter code BTG. It's simple. It's easy. You get the best products out there, and you get 20% off and free shipping. So you can't really beat it.
Can't beat it at all. So speaking of can't beat it at all, we're going to talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers. They're my next team. They seem to can't win at all. Results versus expectations with Cleveland. I projected them to be the 15th team in the East. So I actually had the Knicks above somebody preseason. And right now they are 14th in the East. We know that they drafted Isaac Okoro. They made a big, 4-team deal with a couple other teams to bring in Jared Allen. But their best player to me, Austin, is Colin Sexton. I think that that's pretty simple. He's 24, 3 and 4 scoring, rebounding, and assisting on a 48, 37, 81 clip. 17.8 PER, 3.3 win shares on this bottom dwelling team is not too terrible. Their biggest disappointing rotational player, I think it's easy, is Kevin Love because of the amount of time that he's missed. He's only played about 25 games. This is his second season where he has been very demonstrative on the court, detrimental to the team, not really proving himself to be a big teammate, especially on the amount of money that he makes. He pouts, he quits on his team, he whines. Not only that, but he's averaging 11.5 points per game, 7 rebounds on a 39, 35, 81 clip. He only has 0.7 win shares, kind of contrasting what Colin Sexton has at 3.3. And Austin, get this, his value over replacement player is only at a 0.1. So the coaching job, JB Bickerstaff has a tough gig. I don't know what you can expect of him with the roster that they have. I don't necessarily think that he's been a bad coach, but I don't think that you see anything Cleveland doing that you're like, oh, wow, JB definitely has an imprint on this team. So it's kind of a dangerous place to be as an NBA head coach. So hopefully it works out well for him. And their biggest looming decision to me, Austin, is how much do they pay Jared Allen, the center that they traded for, and who's touted to be their center of the future. It looks like they want to keep this undersized backcourt of, Garland and Sexton together. They have Okoro. They're pretty big on CD Osman as well. I don't know how they continue to build on this team. And, I'm just curious to see how much they pay for Allen. What do you think?
Yeah, for a team that going into the season had, just a traffic jam of big men, so to speak, with Drummond and Love both being really, really high paid, and they had JaVale McGee too, right? And both of those guys that I mentioned first are making a ton of money. Kevin Love's getting like $30+ million a year to basically be a replacement level player, and they obviously need to figure out a way to get out from under that contract. But I will say this for Cleveland, going into the season, I wasn't sure that they had anybody to be too excited about going into the future. And I would say Colin Sexton has proven me wrong there. He's had a good season. So at least they have him and Jared Allen to kind of hopefully build around, because I do like Jared Allen. And I think, if they can get their financial situation figured out with Kevin Love and get his contract off their books as soon as possible, then, they need to try to re-sign him to a pretty big contract, I think, to keep him there, because he's all they really have besides, Sexton and Garland. Garland's had a pretty good year too. He's been off and on, but
I like Okoro too. I think Okoro is showing that he could be a little something in the league too.
Right, definitely. So, they've got some pieces in place now that I feel like at least they have a direction. So, can't really fault the coach like you said. So I think everything you said is pretty spot on.
Yeah, and if you've noticed, Austin, you have the headliner teams. I have what I like to call the league pass teams in
Yeah,
this
it
Eastern
just worked
Conference.
out
So
that way. We just did alphabetical. So
luck of the draw. Yep, it's just the way that it
you got
falls.
my Pacers though. So
I got your Pacers, and you got a guy on this team that I'm interested to hear if you discuss at all. And you're going to be talking about the Detroit Pistons.
I am going to be talking about the Detroit Pistons. Yes, I am. The Detroit Pistons. I projected them 14th, and they're 15th, so not too far off. Their best player has definitely been Jeremy Grant. I know you love him.
Love Grant.
He's had a breakout season. For everybody that was confused why he would take the same amount of money in Detroit versus Denver, where he could go and be on a winning team, this is why he wanted the chance to be the guy. He wanted a chance to eat, so to speak, get his numbers a little bit more, and I think it's worked out for him because in a few years now he's still young enough where he can go he's going to demand a much bigger contract than he would have, long term with the productions that he's had this year. And I'm not so sure that would have been the case in Denver. And even with his talent and how good he is, with Michael Porter Jr., exploding the way he has this year, he might have been somewhat of an odd man out in Denver, in the long run anyway. So I think it was ultimately a good move for him, even though, Detroit hasn't been good. Most disappointing player, you could go with a handful of guys on this team. They've had a rough year. I actually went with a guy that's not even on their team anymore. I went with Blake Griffin. I was excited to see what he could do coming back from injury going into this year. I thought Detroit could surprise some people if he was before he got hurt. I think Blake Griffin, the year before he got hurt, was the best Blake Griffin that we've just about ever seen. He was by far the most efficient. He developed a little bit of a mid-range kind of game to where he had more than just attack the rim on offense, which is kind of what his game always was. But obviously his injuries really, really robbed him of what made him special, because I still don't think he has a dunk this season. I could be wrong. He could have one or two.
His first possession, I think, in Brooklyn was a dunk. Yeah, like as soon as he got to Brooklyn, he dunked the ball.
Well, there you go. But, the whole time he was with Detroit, he never dunked the ball once all year, which, if you had said that about Blake Griffin a year ago, I would have laughed at you. And it's just, I expected some things from him and Derrick Rose. I kind of thought, those two could at least lead this team to, maybe push for the play-in tournament and not be the worst team in the East for sure. So, I was pretty disappointed with how much the injuries have obviously affected him. The coaching job, obviously they think Dwayne Casey's done a pretty good job. I agree. He just got a contract extension, and rightfully so. I think he's one of the best coaches in the game. Underrated for sure. He's one of those guys, kind of like Nate McMillan. He gets the most out of his players. He may not always win titles and may not always be in the finals or be the number one seed, but he's going to get you the most out of your players. And I think we've seen that this year. They've got 3 promising young rookies on this team from this most recent draft. All 3 of them have been fairly good this year. Mm-hmm. Honestly, I think Killian Hayes of the 3 has been if you want to call it a disappointment, the most disappointing of the 3, but just because the other 2 have been better than I expected. And, being a point guard in the NBA is hard. It's going to take him some time, but they've got some good young building blocks. They've got a good coach. Jeremy Grant's been a huge surprise to a lot of people. So despite being 15th in the East, I think there's some things that you can look forward to at Detroit. My biggest decision looming for them is, how do they get better? Who do they target in the offseason? Is Jeremy Grant their star player? Is he good enough to be the number 1 guy? I don't know. I think he'd be a damn good number 2, but are they able to get a star player in Detroit, or are we looking at a long rebuild where they're going to have to hit somebody and get lucky and hit a star in the draft? Which small market teams like that, a lot of times that's how it goes. But the Pistons do have some some history in the NBA. They are one of those franchises that, even though Detroit's not the hugest market, they do have some positive history that people could look at and say, hey, they've been good a lot of different times. They could do it again. And I'm just interested to see where they go from here, who they target in the offseason.
Yeah, and I think that the draft is going to be how they address that. And it looks like they feel the same way too. I mean, worst record in the Eastern Conference. Surprisingly, not the worst record in the league overall. But I mean, obviously everyone's gunning for a Cade Cunningham, a Jalen Suggs, kind of one of these transformational type guys that I think can come in and make an immediate impact on their team. I love the breakdown that you gave of Coach Casey. I think that he should hold like coaching seminars on how to get the most out of players, because look at the Josh Jackson reclamation project that he's had this year. People, kind of at the network have poked fun of me. I love the way that he's getting, production out of Dennis Smith Jr., a guy that the NBA was about ready to give up on. He's kind of has this, campaign feel, coming out of Phoenix. What we're seeing with him, Dennis Smith could end up being that same type of player.
Well, hey, Mason Plumlee's almost averaging a double-double this year, and
had a triple-double this year too.
Right. He's literally like 0.7 rebounds away from being a double-double on average this year, shooting 61%. Like, I don't know if that's something that I would have ever expected from him, just based on where his career has been so far. So he's, like I said, he's one of the best at getting the most out of guys.
Absolutely, man. And I love the fact that Saddiq Bey is probably going to be, I think he should be an All-NBA first team rookie. We'll see what happens. But, speaking of, you talked about Nate McMillan earlier. How about we talk about the team that they had a bad breakup with, and that's the Indiana Pacers. Results versus expectations for me. I projected them to be 7th in the East. They're 9th. So I was expecting a little bit of a slide back, but not, as drastic as what we're seeing now. Obviously, we talked about the coaching change, swapping Nate McMillan for Nate Bjorkgren. TJ Warren opted in for surgery, so he was done for the year. And then they acquired Karis LeVert in a trade, which I think long-term is going to help them. Best player, obviously, is Domantas Sabonis. He's an all-star for the consecutive season. Might be an All-NBA player, according to our buddy Patrick Graham from, Say It Out Loud sports podcast and on Off the Ball Network. He had him on his third team. So he's giving you 20, 12, and 7 on a 54, 33, 73 clip. 20.7 PER and 7 win shares on the 9th place team in the East. It's not bad. Disappointing rotational player, Austin. I'm curious to kind of get your feedback on this one. I have Goga Batadze. He's a first round pick last year. He's barely playing, gives you less than 12 minutes per game, 0.2 value over rotational player. He's averaging 5 and 3 on a 43, 24, 78% clip. The coaching job, it's no secret now that Nate Bjorkgren is rumored to be done after this season. He's lost the locker room, it feels like, and he's even lost people on his staff, either via suspension or just walking away from the team altogether. And to me, their biggest looming decision, I'm assuming that Nate Bjorkgren is done after this year. As I say this, how do they recover after losing, McDermott and McConnell after being negative 29 million projected in salary cap next season? Both of these guys are going to be unrestricted. They do have some luxury tax space, but I don't know if you go into the luxury cap for McConnell and McDermott after going 9th place in the East, Austin. What do you think of that assessment?
I don't think the Pacers are going into the luxury cap to save their lives to begin with. I don't think their owner is going to be okay with that for anything in the world unless it's to sign a superstar player. So I think you're right there for sure. I think that's one of the big gripes that everybody here in Indianapolis has with the Pacers is when we're close, they won't spend that little bit extra to take that extra step. And I think the big thing is I felt, and a lot of people felt, that this team was really close. And looking up and down the roster, Malcolm Brogdon is really, really good. Sabonis is really, really good. Oladipo, he was hurt. They traded him. The guy they got for him, I think LeVert, was a heck of a deal for Indiana. And I think he's really, really good. Miles Turner, underrated by fans, and I think properly rated by most NBA people, he's one of the ones that's weird because I think a lot of fans don't really understand the value that he has for this team. But to me, it's a roster that should be top 4 or 5 in the East. I really think so. And obviously the coaching change didn't work. Nate Bjorkgren, for whatever reason, hasn't sat well with the guys on this team. They just don't seem to, really listen to his message, or they don't really respond to it well. And what you said about Goga, I think is spot on. He was a first round pick. You've got to see what you've got in the guy, and they're not even really giving him a chance to play, and which is weird. And he's not really shooting the ball all that well. And I can never remember a situation in my life where a guy in the middle of a game turns and points to his own bench and starts yelling cuss words at the coach. Like, that's unreal. And so something's really gone wrong there with him and with that team. And TJ McConnell was a guy coming into the NBA. I was skeptical on how good he would be and how long he would last. And he's arguably one of the best backup point guards in the league. I mean, he had a triple-double off the bench this year. He's had 10 steal game. He's had multiple 10 assist games off the bench, which is crazy. And
he's going to get paid somewhere, and so is McDermott
for sure if they don't figure out a way to bring him back. And McDermott too. This is a team that 2 years ago was one of the best three-point shooting teams in the NBA in terms of efficiency. They just didn't shoot it a lot. And then this year they've shot it a lot and haven't been that efficient. So I think, you need all the three-point shooters you can get in today's NBA, and McDermott's pretty much knockdown three-point shooter for the most part. And it's going to be hard pressed to see Indiana improve from where they are now with the way their cap is, and unless they just go out and get a really good head coach, and that's what they need to turn it around. So we'll see.
We will see, man. And all right, speaking of really good head coaches and great, really, really good players, you talked about Victor Oladipo, his new home, and just for everyone who doesn't know, he's done for the year for the Miami Heat. But Austin, what's your assessment of how the Miami Heat have done so far?
Well, at first I was kind of down on the Miami Heat. I have been kind of down on them all year. I had them in my way too early rankings. I think I had them finishing first in the East. I was pretty high on them coming off of the NBA Finals run. And, a lot of people were, rightfully so. They looked really, really good. But I ended up projecting them to finish third, and they're in fifth right now. So, a month ago, I was a lot more down on them than I am now. They look good. But injuries have had a huge part of that to this team, and just guys missing time. Tyler Hero's only played not even 50 games. Jimmy Butler's missed 20 games. It seems like every guy on this team has missed a lot of time. But they're healthy now. They're winning games.
Yeah.
Jimmy Buckets is back, as I like to call him when he's on, and he's leading his team. I've got him on one of my All NBA teams as well. And you can see when he's right, this team is hard to beat. And he's had honestly statistically his best year. And so I think you can kind of expect a little bit of a run from Miami maybe in these playoffs again. We'll see. I don't know if Milwaukee didn't match up well with them last year. I think Milwaukee's kind of a tough matchup for them this year, but they may not even have to play them in the first round now. We're not 100% sure on where the standings are going to finish. So, if they're playing the Hawks in the first round, I think that's a tough matchup for both those teams. It could really go either way, but I think Miami's just really, really well coached. Most disappointing player, and I'm being kind of hard on him just for one reason, and it's Tyler Hero for me, just because the hype around this guy, and it's not his fault. It's he's not the one pushing this hype out there. He had a heck of a time in the bubble. He was incredible, and everybody kind of expected him to make this leap, and he's gotten a little bit better, but the whole we can't trade him for James Harden thing, it's just it sticks in my mind every single time I think about this team. Like, imagine if they had James Harden with Bam and Jimmy Butler right now, how good they would be. And it goes to show you that even guys like Pat Riley aren't perfect. And sometimes you hold on to a guy for whatever reason and he's just not the guy you think he is, and maybe he will be, but he's young. But I wanted to see more out of him this year, and it hasn't really quite been there. And maybe Bubble Tyler will show back up in the playoffs, and they'll go on a run again, and I could very well see that happening. And Coach Spo, how I feel about him. Eric Spoelstra, to me, is the best coach in the NBA.
He's right up there, yeah.
It shows more in the playoffs even than in the regular season, because you see time and time again, a guy's system doesn't work for 7 straight games against the same team. You've got to be able to adjust, and nobody adjusts like Eric Spoelstra does. So, he's done another masterful job. He's one of the longest tenured coaches in the NBA, and he's not going anywhere for a long time. I was going to say their biggest decision is Victor Oladipo. Do they re-sign him, and to how much money? But with another injury, I don't know if that door hasn't closed for Miami. I feel bad for him. He turned down a huge extension with the Pacers. He turned down a huge extension with Houston. He goes and he played I think, 10 minutes or something with Miami.
Yeah.
And just has been out. And he's having surgery again on his quad, which, let's be honest, it robbed him of the explosiveness that he had that made him so great 2 or 3 years ago. He, when he made the All-Star team. And, ever since then, it's kind of just been downhill for him, and I feel bad about it. But going forward, I would say if that door's closed, do they bring back Goran Dragic? They've got a team option on him for next year, but it's like $21 million.
Yeah.
And, he's been in the league a long time. And if he has another playoffs like he had last year, where he was arguably their best player for quite a long stretch in those playoffs before he got hurt, then maybe I could justify bringing him back at that number, just because what he's going to give you come playoff time. He's done it 2 years in a row. But at the age he's at, with the other guards they have on this team, you've got to be thinking they can use that money somewhere else to a little bit better. So we'll see how the playoffs go. I think that's going to be a big factor determining whether or not they bring back Goran Dragic.
Yeah, and they have a number of decisions they got to make. How much do they pay Duncan Robinson? There's a whole but Kendrick Nunn. All these guys are going to be looking to make money here soon.
Right.
And $21 million with, bird rights on guys goes a long way. So we'll see what happens with Goran Dragic there. But yeah, the whole Tyler Hero thing, I'm glad that you went that route, because his, 20-point games are few and far between. But when he hits them, man, Twitter will definitely let you know that he's on for that night. So we talked about the Heat. Let's talk about the team that, they beat last season, and in a matchup that a lot of us on the network called that would go down that way, are the Milwaukee Bucks. Results versus expectations for me. I projected them to be third in the East. And that's exactly where they are this year. They traded for Drew Holiday. They added Bobby Portis Jr. They got PJ Tucker from Houston. Austin, no surprise here. Their best player, Giannis Antetokounmpo. He's giving you 20, 11, and 6 on a 57, 30, 69 clip, 29.1 PER, almost 10 win shares a game. It's ridiculous. I know that we're not supposed to say this, but you can put him in the MVP conversation and even the Defensive Player of the Year conversation. You could argue that this season is his best of the last 3 that he's had, but that's a conversation for another day. Now, you had mentioned that there was a team that you had a hard time coming up with who the most disappointing rotational player was. Not going to lie, Milwaukee kind of gave me that same problems. I went ahead, though, and picked Dante DiVincenzo based on the fact that, one, I think that he was kind of a reach for where they drafted him when he was drafted, but his value has seemed to gone down, especially after adding Drew Holiday to this team. He takes bad shots often, and his efficiency has gone down. Plays about 20 minutes per game. His value over rotational player is 0.9, which is 102nd in the NBA. He's not even top 5 on this team in terms of scoring. His defense, he still gives you value there, but I don't think that it's necessarily vital to the output of this team. And again, this is the one I had to pick a player, and I just decided to go with Dante here. Coaching job, I think Mike Budenholzer has done a great job of having a good season and it going under the radar. They're top 10 in defensive and offensive rating. And I feel like their scheme has changed from last season to this year. So we'll see, obviously, how he does in the playoffs. But I think that he's done a good job. And biggest looming decision, if they don't make a deep run in the playoffs, is Mike Budenholzer the coach of this team? Because they've invested heavily into Chris and Giannis. They just invested heavily into Drew. They have guys on this team who are good rotational players. Really, the only change that, in my opinion, that you can make, barring breaking it up, is making a coaching change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with the lack of picks that they have going forward and where they are financially, they're not going to be able to really break this team up and make it any better. Barring some kind of crazy, superstar trade, I've seen, things floated on Twitter of Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton and whatever else they can throw in for maybe like a Damian Lillard, if and I don't know why Portland would ever do that in the first place unless Lillard asked for a trade. So I don't see a route that this team can take to really improve this roster a whole lot. And do they really need to? They've got a heck of a team.
Yeah.
They're really, really good on offense and they're really, really good on defense. And for in his defense, Mike Budenholzer did all the things you and I talked about we wanted to see them do this offseason. They've run different sets. They've gotten the ball out of Giannis's hands a little bit more. He's playing more minutes per game. His usage rate went down and his minutes per game went up, which I think is perfect because you want to get him the ball in these spots to be able to be the most effective. And he's not the most effective 30 feet from the basket. He's just not. And Chris Middleton kind of is. And Drew Holiday is much more efficient from that part of the floor than Giannis. So they've done the things I think we wanted to see from them. Whether or not it, translates to a title remains to be seen. But I've been saying it for a while now. I wouldn't be shocked if they make the NBA Finals by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair assessment on your end, too, for where they make the finals. And that's why I was saying they're having a strong season, but they've flown underneath the radar. Why do you think that is?
Probably because they've been the number one team the last 2 years, and they've had the best record in the NBA, and we're at third in the East this year now. And, but I think that's partially by design. Like I said, they're trying to do different things and try different sets. And Mike Budenholzer, the one big knock on him has always been that his system, that's all they do. They do that one thing and that's it. And they've been a lot more, flexible with that this year. So
yeah, a little less rigid this season than years past. All right, Austin. So we got a couple minutes. We're going to hit one more team before we close out for the day. And you have the Off the Ball Network darlings of the NBA.
Cover your ears.
The New York Knickerbockers.
All right. The New York pants, so to speak.
New York pants, so to speak. All right.
I learned something yesterday. I really didn't know that's what that came from. That's interesting. But for anybody that didn't know, Knickerbockers is a type of pants they used to wear back in the day, I guess. So there you go. I did have the New York Knicks, and I will tell you guys from the jump, I thought I was being very, very generous projecting them to finish 11th in the East this year. I thought, hey, man, they've got some players that could be good, but it's going to be a rough year. Not so. And I really kind of feel like I should have seen it coming because, Tom Thibodeau is one of the best at turning around a losing team for sure. He's going to work those guys to death. But if you're willing to listen to what he says and do it how he says, you almost know that you're going to be successful. And I said it the other day, Thibodeau's going to be Thibodeau. Two of his three players, or two of the top three players in minutes, are Knicks in RJ Barrett's third and Julius Randle's first in minutes played. And, that's kind of how it always goes for a Tom Thibodeau coach team. Julius Randle has obviously been their best player. I think he's had a all NBA level performance. Some people want to push him into the MVP talk, and I think that's a little too much yet, but he's had a heck of a year. You can't really take anything away from what this guy's done. He's the driving force behind this team. He's had huge storybook moments throughout the year where, he's had 40-point games. He's had incredible performances. So he's been fantastic. Most disappointing player, and again, this is one that I don't want people to take the wrong way. I went with Obi Toppin, and not that I think he's going to be like a career disappointment or he was a bad pick where they took him at all. I still think he was a great selection where they got him. I had expectations that he could be the best offensive rookie coming out of this draft his first year. I thought his offensive game at the very least would translate pretty well to the NBA. I think he's averaging 4 points a game. Yeah. So, but a lot of that's no fault of his own too. RJ Barrett has improved a lot. Julius Randle, I don't think they really expected him to be anywhere near where he's at now. And I kind of think that that's taken up a lot of the time for Obi to really have a chance to shine and to grow. So I do still expect him to be a great player going forward. I had a lot higher expectations with him at the beginning of the year than what we saw. I already touched on Coach Thibodeau a little bit, so I won't go too much into that. I just think, you saw it with the Bulls. You saw it with not as much with Minnesota, but
they made the playoffs for the first time in forever underneath them. So
true. And that is a good point. And it's Minnesota. So, they've always been pretty rough team throughout their history. It's always been rough to be a fan of the Timberwolves for sure. Biggest decision for the Knicks going forward, I still think is the same thing that it was at the end of last year. And they've got to find a point guard for this team for the future. I like Emmanuel Quickly, but is he, your starting NBA point guard on a championship level team? I don't know yet. Maybe. But they've got a lot of cap space. They've they've got room to make some moves going forward. And I still think that, you get this team a legitimate starting NBA point guard, even maybe all-star caliber point guard. Just everybody says, is this next team one player away? Well, no, I'm not so sure about that. I think one player and they could compete in the East for one of those top 3 or 4 spots going forward, because they've got a lot of young, really, really exciting players on this roster.
Yeah, they absolutely do. And I think too, Austin, we both, our last couple segments have talked about disappointing. And it's not that we're saying that these players are bad. And I think that's why we picked the term disappointing, is because it's kind of the reality versus expectations aspect of it, and that's where I lived with Dante DiVincenzo. Not to say that he's a bad player, but he's kind of taking a step back on a really good deep team. And the same thing for Obi. I had him as my second best player on my board. He's in that aspect, it has been a disappointing season, but he hasn't really been needed to be that type of player for this team. And I loved your comment on Tibbs, spot on. And then also they have multiple draft picks moving forward too. So do they look to keep building young with the change in front office that they've had, or do they try to cash in on some of their assets? So all fair assessments, but Austin, we're coming up against it as predicted. We still have the Orlando Magic, the 76ers, the Raptors, the Wizards, and our teams for next season to keep an eye on. But that's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. Awesome. Before we go, do you got any parting words?
Thanks for listening, everybody. Just go to offtheballnetwork.com. Check out me and Steven's all NBA teams. Hit us up on Twitter. Tell us which one you think is more realistic, which one you like better, who you think did better. For my money, I'll take Steven's, but that's just, I think, the world of all the work you do, that. And check out everything on our network. Everybody's doing a great job. Steven and I were just on a show the other night with Jelani, and that was so much fun. I mean, it went almost 2 hours, and it felt like we could have just kept going all night. So that's just the way that everybody is on this network. We could talk about this stuff all day, and we work with some really, really talented people. So go ahead and make sure you check everybody out.
Yeah, and we were on the name of that podcast was What the Game Means to Me with Jelani Brown. So go and check that out. Thad is normally on there too, but he wasn't on for that night, which we gotta work with that here soon. But absolutely, man. Go to offtheballnetwork.com for all of your sports needs. If you want to follow Austin on Twitter, you can hit him up at Austin Carr 10 on Twitter. Is that right? All right.
That's
so
correct.
I have it committed to memory. You can follow me at Steven BTG, which stands for Breaking the Game. If you want to follow Breaking the Game, our social media platforms are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at BTG NBA Pod. And that's available anywhere podcasts are available too. So go ahead, go subscribe and follow, leave us a nice 5-star rating and a nice review. That would help us out a lot. And you get to listen to the rest of this exclusive episode. But for the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio today, that's going to wrap it up. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Shout out to Off the Ball Network. And before we go, I want to let everyone know that you can go and get 20% off and free shipping with code BTG at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com. Use code BTG, unlock your confidence, and as always, use the right tools for the job with Manscaped. But like I said, we're done for the day. We're going to be on the podcast. We'll catch up with y'all next time. Much love, everybody.
Have a good one.
All righty. So, Austin, we're picking up right back where we left off on the podcast here on Breaking the Game. Thank you, everyone, so much for tuning right back in to the show. Thank you for listening to us on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. But, Austin, we left off with your assessment of the New York Knicks. And why don't you just give us a nice little recap on what you
so
did there.
Their best players obviously been Julius Randle. I did go with Obi Toppin for most disappointing, but like you and I both said, most disappointing doesn't mean we think they're a bad player. It's just I expected big things out of Obi Toppin offensively coming out of college, and he hasn't really had the opportunity to show us that yet. That's not really his fault. Thibodeau, can't say enough about him as a coach. His coaching style is a little rough around the edges for some people, but he's proven time and time again, if you listen to what he says and you do things the way he wants them done, that you're pretty much going to be successful. And the Knicks are the best defensive team in the NBA for a reason, and that's a big part of it. And then just going forward, what do they do with all, like you said, with all the picks they have, with the cap space, they need to find a point guard for the future. Is Emmanuel quickly that guy? Maybe, maybe not. We're not to that point yet where we have to really determine. But I think if this team wants to make the leap to, compete for a title in the next couple of years, that finding a point guard is the way for them to go.
Yeah, and again, I echo that same sentiment. They got 2 first-round draft picks. Do they keep those and improve their depth? Do they combine those, try to move up? Do they try to grab a player? We don't know. We can only speculate here, but we're going to move forward now with my assessment of the Orlando Magic. I projected them to be in the East. In my notes, for some reason, I have them at 3rd, but I believe they're 13th in the East now, so not too far off, especially considering that they shipped off all of their best players in Vucevic, Gordon, and Fournier. So this left me a big hole, Austin, for best player because I didn't want to pick guys who are no longer on the team.
Mm-hmm.
And so that left me with, I could have picked 2 guys. One of them was Terrence Ross, who I didn't go with. But I'm going to go ahead and go with the rookie Cole Anthony as their best player. He's averaging 12, 5, and 4, 40% from the field, 33% from deep, 83% from the free throw line, almost a 12 PER, which is not bad for a rookie to be league average already for where he was drafted at 9th. That was a good get. I actually projected them on offtheballnetwork.com. You can go see my mock draft. I predicted that the Magic would get Cole Anthony because they needed a point guard. And he's at 0 win shares, but on a team that's losing a lot, to be dead even in win shares, I feel like that's you can look at that in a positive light. Mm-hmm. Now, Austin, my most disappointing rotational player has been Mo Bamba. And again, this is a weird team because you can obviously see what they're trying to do. They're not trying to win basketball games right now. Mm-hmm. They want to develop the young core, get some nice depth, maybe land a star in the draft, and have good rotational players surrounding them. So I went with Mo Bamba. He was the 6th overall pick when he was taken. Vooch was traded, and since then has only started like 4 games. So even without Nikola Vucevic, they have, kind of their project, maybe star in the making, Mo Bamba, very tantalizing prospect coming out of the University of Texas. We're not seeing much of him. He is averaging 8, 6, and 1 on a 48, 32, 68% clip. Only a 0.4 value over rotational player. So it's been a little disappointing because I thought that we might see this climb. But, obviously the trade to Chicago brought in Wendell Carter Jr. So that to me kind of signaled that maybe Orlando doesn't have the utmost confidence in the talents of Mo Bamba. Mm-hmm. So their coaching job, Steve Clifford has obviously been dealt a rebuilding job here. And I don't know if he kind of fits that timeline. I'm kind of cheating here. This is another looming decision, kind of bonus content, if you will. Does he kind of fit their timeline? I don't know if he's necessarily going to be their coach moving down the road because he's a no nonsense. I demand it now. Orlando doesn't seem to be on that same page right now. So with that being said, my other biggest looming decision with so many young players and more picks, who do they target in the draft? Because now they have Chicago's pick too with that Vooch trade, which looks like it's going to be valuable. They have a couple point guards, they have some wings, and they have a couple bigs. So I don't know who they target in the draft. Maybe the best available. Do they go maybe after Jonathan Kuminga? Does he fit? But Orlando likes these kind of multifaceted, versatile players. I think a Green might be a good pick for this team as well, if they can land him, depending on where the lottery balls bounce. Maybe Jalen Green on this team would be a good fit. But Austin, what do you think of the Orlando Magic assessment?
Well, if they can get Jalen Green, I think they better jump on it. To me, he's I'll just say it. He's my number 1 prospect in this whole draft. I love Cade Cunningham. I just think Jalen Green has a chance to be absolutely special. And if we're being honest about it, Orlando doesn't have a star. They need a guy that they can look at and say, hey, this is who we think is going to be the guy. And Kuminga's really, really good, but he kind of, to me, feels like a number 2. Like he would be a really, really good number 2, but is he going to be, that dual forward we like to talk about, that engine for a team? And I think Jalen Green fits that mold, perfectly. So if they can get him, I think they better jump at that chance. But something you don't see a whole lot of in the NBA draft that I would like that I would think would make sense for this team is you don't see a lot of teams really like package picks and move up like you do in the NFL. Mm-hmm. And if they have 2 lottery picks that are say in the top 12 and top 5, and they can move up to second or third and get a Jalen Green or a Jalen Suggs even, I think that's something that they really, really need to look hard at doing, because they do need a lot of guys, that they have a lot of holes to fill. But I think first and foremost for Orlando, it's been this way for Orlando for as long as I can remember, is they need to find a star player, because up until this year, they've been hesitant to start a full rebuild like this, and they've just kind of been middling around the 8th seed, just good enough to get in the playoffs, not good enough to win a series, and right in the middle of the pack year after year. And they've obviously decided that now's the time to try to rebuild, and I think they should go all in this draft.
I wholeheartedly agree. So it looks like they're doing a little bit of what this team used to do once upon a time.
Mm-hmm.
Not any longer. We're talking about the Philadelphia 76ers, Austin. Yes. So you have the honor to break down one of my favorite teams to watch in the Eastern Conference this year. So what do you think of Philly?
Well, this is one of my favorite teams to watch in the East too. So we're in agreement on that for sure.
That's why we co-host the show together.
Right. Philly, Philly's one of these teams where, am I allowed to say I told you so, but also be surprised at how they finished? Because I've felt like for the last 3 or 4 years that they've had the talent to be the best team in the Eastern Conference. It's just whether or not they put it together. And this year they have. And, a lot of that has to do, I think, with the coaching of Doc Rivers. And I was on this show saying a year ago that I wasn't that high on Doc Rivers to Philly, because he's lost a lot of big leads in playoffs scenarios. He's really, really, really liked and respected as a coach, but I thought his reputation was maybe a little bit overrated. I was wrong about that. He's had a heck of a year. They figured out how to make Embiid and Simmons work together, and which is apparently some mystical thing that no one could figure out how to get to, otherworldly level players to play well together on offense, just because they're both not necessarily shooters. Once upon a time, the NBA didn't rely solely on having a bunch of shooters on the court, and they were able to figure it out. So, Doc's figured it out. You haven't heard a word all year about Ben Simmons' inability or unwillingness to shoot threes, whatever it is. And, it's because they've kind of taken the ball out of his hands on offense, so to speak, a little bit. And they don't really expect him to do a whole lot on offense. And it's kind of unlocked him to be what I think is the best one-on-one defender in the NBA. I think he can go in there, and he has a unique ability, like what a couple guys on the Clippers have, to shut down a star player on the other team. And in the NBA anymore, that you don't see that a whole lot. You don't see guys really put the clamps on people, so to speak, like that. And he's been doing it all year. And, his counterpart, Joel Embiid, has been just as good defensively in the post and protecting the rim. He's, still an MVP candidate despite missing a quarter of the season or so. To me, Embiid has been their best player for sure. This is another one where I actually wrote none in my list for most disappointing rotation player. I don't think there's a guy in their rotation that they're really, that I'm really disappointed in their performance. They went and got Seth Curry, and he's been great. Tobias Harris has had his best year since in a while, since maybe he was with the Clippers with Doc Rivers. So, that makes sense. Shake Milton's had a really good year as their backup point guard. Ben Simmons, like I said, up for Defensive Player of the Year. Embiid's up for MVP. What more can you want from this rotation? I don't think there's been a single guy on this team that I'm down on. Philly's one of these teams where in a couple of months I could see a lot of people saying, well, why didn't we see this coming when they're the NBA champions? And they very easily could win the title this year. I think it's pretty wide open compared to what we thought things were going to be going into the season. I did have them 4th in the East to start the year, and obviously they've exceeded my expectations, but I'm surprised, but happily surprised at how good they've done this year.
Yeah, I had them 5th. I had the team that I'm going to be talking about next ahead of them, on top of the other big 3 in the East outside of the Boston Celtics too. So I had Brooklyn and Milwaukee over them too. But I think a lot of it had to do with Doc Rivers coming in, and I think the expectation for so many people is that how do you make Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid work with the assumption that Ben has to be the number 2 option on offense. And Doc Rivers comes in and says, oh no, we're going to have Tobias Harris be the second option on offense. And Ben is just going to be able to exert himself as much as he wants on the defensive end. And, obviously play make on the offensive end and be available for dunks and transition opportunities. So smart move by him to think outside of the box. And I love Doc Rivers, and I'm not going to lament or, expound on that much more because I felt like I've done a good job since, we started talking about him being overrated last year. So Toronto Raptors, there's no real lead in that I want to give this team because I don't think that they deserve one. First off, results versus expectations. I had Toronto 5th and I had Philly 4th, so a little bit higher. Now they're 12th in the East. They lost Ibaka and Gasol. Those were the 2 biggest losses on this team, and with their age and with Chris Boucher on the team, they brought in, Aaron Baines. I thought, okay, that's not going to be that significant of a drop off. Man, I was totally wrong. And listen, they moved from Toronto to Tampa, so maybe Nick Nurse is kind of getting a little bit of a pass. I'm going to go ahead and get into my coaching evaluation here. Maybe he's getting a little bit of a pass on a very disappointing season because of that aspect. And I wonder how much tolerance they're going to give him based on that. But their best player this year, I think this is a little bit debatable. You could say Pascal Siakam, or you can say the guy who I picked, Fred VanVleet. He's giving you 24 and 6 every night on 39% from the floor overall. That's not super impressive. But when you consider how much of them are from deep, he's shooting 37% from deep. That's pretty impressive. And 89% from the free throw line. He's giving you 16.8 PER and 4.3 win shares on the 12th best team in the East. It's not that bad at all. Disappointing rotational player, Austin. I went ahead and picked Aaron Baines because he's replacing 2 championship level front court players in Gasol and Ibaka that we talked about earlier. He only gives you 5 and 5 on 43% from the field as a big. That's terrible. 24% from deep after what we saw in Phoenix. Huge drop off. And then 73% from the line. Austin, get this. He's negative 0.8 in terms of value over rotational players. So he's not even a rotational player in the NBA right now. And he was kind of looked at as to be the bridge big between their championship season, a couple years ago to now, trying to look and see what they do rebuilding wise. I already talked about Nick Nurse and the coaching performance. I still think that he's a talented and a capable head coach, but we're gonna start hearing like how much of the win was because of Kawhi. Yeah, it was cool that he put in these funky high school defenses and it confused the mess out of offenses in the NBA. But is he that dude? Does he deserve to start having these assistant coaches of his branch out and get other opportunities elsewhere? So keep that in mind.
We've seen how one has turned out so far.
Yeah, and it's not been great. Right. Biggest looming decision, though, is how do the Raptors handle Kyle Lowry and Gary Trent Jr.? Now, they traded Gary Trent with Portland. They handed out Norman Powell. Now they have a restricted free agent. They have an aging veteran who's largely looked at as the best player in franchise history. And how do they handle those things? I think that that's going to be the biggest looming decision because they got great young pieces in Siakam, VanVleet, Anunoby. They have another couple of guys on their team too, like Chris Boucher, who could be coming off the bench. It's just curious to me. I'm curious, on how they handle that. Austin, what do you think?
Me too. I think for as much as I've lamented the trade of Gary Trent Jr. away from Portland, I think it was a really, really good move on Toronto's part because
absolutely
he's a young, up-and-coming stud player. So I think they need to focus on re-signing him. And it really comes down to what's important for Toronto, holding on to, memories of this championship team and arguably the greatest player in franchise history in Kyle Lowry, or is it continuing to be a championship contender? Because I don't think they can tie up a whole lot of money for a whole lot longer in Kyle Lowry and still compete. I think that money could be used elsewhere better. I kind of saw this coming for Toronto. I thought they would have a significant drop off. I had them at the bottom of the playoff picture, not out of the playoffs completely, but pretty far down there. I think 7th or 8th. Mm-hmm. And Ibaka and Gasol have hurt. Those losses have hurt them for sure. And Aaron Baines is the surprising part. What you said, like I liked him. I thought he had a couple good years in Phoenix. He's looked good. I thought he was going to come in there and really be helpful, especially from stretching the floor and shooting. And he's been awful. So whatever's happened there, it hasn't worked out. Toronto's got a lot of questions going forward, but if there's ever such thing as a lost year, I think you can call it this year. I don't know, going into it, not having a home to play in and being stuck in Tampa all year and not being allowed in Canada at all, really. I don't know how much Toronto wanted to win this year, how much they expected to be able to win this year. So if you can call a year a lost year, I think this is the one time where I would be okay with that.
That sounds good. So Austin, you are giving the heavy task of not only talking about the Washington Wizards, but discussing who their best player is. I'm really interested to see the route that you go here, because I think there's an argument that could be made between two guys. I think you and I are going to share the same opinion, but I'm just curious to see which route you go.
Well, yeah, there's definitely an argument made that, one of two guys is Washington's best player. But I think, past history and just the last couple of months have shown that it's not Bradley Beal. It is, in fact, Westbrook. And how much I love Russell Westbrook and how I feel about him. I won't go too in depth on it, but how much more can you say about the guy? I mean, he's 23, 11.6 and 11.6 on the year. It's his fourth season averaging a triple double. He's the career leader in triple doubles, something that I never thought I would see broken. And since he got healthy and since he's going on this triple double streak and this tear of dominance, Washington has shot up from 6 weeks ago. They were last place, and they're about to clinch a spot in the play-in tournament. That's crazy. That fast to make that big of a turnaround. And Bradley Beal is terrific. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. Bradley Beal has had a second year in a row where he's been, almost unstoppable at times on offense. And he's one of these guys that can go out and get 50 at any given moment, and he's great. But that hasn't translated to a whole lot of winning in Washington at all in the last 2 or 3 years. And Russell Westbrook comes in and just kind of took over. And I think it's a kind of a perfect fit between these two guys, because it leaves Bradley Beal to just kind of focus on scoring and lets Westbrook do a little bit of everything else. So I think Westbrook has kind of been the difference since he's been healthy for this team. Coaching job, Scott Brooks, I don't know. He's a lame duck. He doesn't have a contract going forward. So that usually doesn't bode well for coaches. Usually that means they're on their way out. But since he's had his guys healthy, and since Westbrook has come back, to being Russell Westbrook, because I'll be one of the first people to admit the first month of the season, I was saying he was done. I thought he was at the point where he was just going to fall off that cliff that everybody talks about. And, he proved me wrong too. So I could see him keeping him. I could see him getting fired. Honestly, it could go either way. I had expectations of this team sneaking in the playoffs at the bottom, which is what they've done. So I wouldn't be opposed to bringing him back. Disappointing players. I could pick just about anybody other than the two guys that we went with. I guess Bertans is who I went with.
I like it.
He hasn't really had the year that a lot of people expected with, he was one of those guys in free agency that everybody talked about with his shooting, how important he was going to be to a team. And
he got paid.
Yes, he did. He got a lot of money. And that's really the main factor of why I picked him. Just that, he seems overpaid now, whereas last year he seemed, horribly underpaid. It's like I hate to say it because I don't know the guy and I don't want to speak on his personal motivations or anything, but a lot of times you see guys get paid and this is what happens. They finally get that big contract and they treat that like the finish line. And, hey, I got my money now. Here we are. I'm a star in the NBA. And maybe that's not the case. Maybe he just struggled this year and for whatever reason, but he's definitely been, a disappointment for that team for sure. But all things considered, I think I had them at 10 or 11 in the East. I think 10, and I think that's where they are right now. So, they're right about where I expected.
Yeah, and that's a fair assessment. I love the way that you went with the Scott Brooks discussion because, do they, don't they type thing. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you look at possibly finishing, 9th, 8th place in the Eastern Conference as a win. I think that we can get caught up so much in like, they were the worst team, and now they're
Mhm.
just only slightly bad now. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then considering what he's done in his totality in his time in Washington, I don't think that it bodes well. I think that you can look at this roster and look at the improvements that they made, you know, as far as getting the best out of their players
Mhm.
late in the season and say, okay, look at what we did this year. How much better could we be with a coach who maybe is a little bit more contemporary, maybe
Right.
is, you know, more offensive minded, I guess, so to speak. So
Mhm.
because Brooks is, look, it's no secret that he's a defensive minded coach, and this isn't necessarily the best defensive team either. So you can look at it at that aspect
Right.
as well. So
And then
um,
too, if you just look at it just through the lens of they've got two guys that are probably going to make all NBA teams. They shouldn't be 10th in the East with two guys that are that good. So
right, yeah, look at what Boston is dealing with right now with their two
Mhm.
stars, right? So Austin, you came up with this last segment. I love it. I wanted you to kind of go ahead and take lead on this in the direction of who is your team next year to pay attention to in the Eastern Conference.
Well, for me, it's the Charlotte Hornets. I think they're already a year ahead of where I expected them to be this time last year. LaMelo Ball, I think, is a superstar in the making. I think they have every reason to be incredibly excited about that guy there. I think he's what everybody expected his older brother to be right out of the gate. And no offense to Lonzo, he's a good player, but LaMelo's got it. He's got that it factor. I think that he's just, he's already kind of figured it out. And Gordon Hayward has proven again, that I think he's one of the more underrated players in the NBA. I love Gordon Hayward. He's been hurt again this year, but you see how Boston has done this year without him. I think they miss him, and everybody always said, "Oh, he was redundant." He plays the same position as their other two stars, and they can afford to lose him. Well, maybe that wasn't the case, and he's been terrific for them. Terry Rozier, like you said, has had a terrific year, kind of a resurgence, because I think a lot of people were pretty high on him after those playoff, performances he had for Boston. And then when he went to Charlotte, he was so. But Devontae Graham is kind of the wild card on that team. They get a big man and replace, if they do lose Devontae Graham, use that money to bolster their front court. This is a team I think that in a very short amount of time could be really, really good in the Eastern Conference. And, Miles Bridges, PJ Washington, they've got young, talented players all over the floor. So that are versatile. I think they've got a good coach. Michael Jordan might have his first winning team as an owner in, just about ever. So
Yeah.
I'm excited for that. So I'm pretty interested to see where they go from here. And I think the future is bright in Charlotte.
Yeah, I think if they get a big man, then it's legit that they're a team that you got to pay attention to. And
Mhm.
I love Miles Bridges. Everyone looks at him as just a dunker. I think that while at face value you can appreciate that, I encourage you to dig a little bit deeper because there's so much more to his game than that.
He's been on my fantasy team all year, and he's been like a huge bright spot for me. He's done a lot of good things.
Yeah, he can shoot, he can defend. Mm-hmm. He's very athletic. He's actually a pretty timely shot blocker as well. Mm-hmm. So pay attention to Charlotte. I love the direction that you went. I love that you picked them. The team that I'm going to say to watch out for next year and is because of who they have in their front office, the team that they came over from in Golden State. You can kind of start seeing a little bit of the same parallels in how they're performing this early in their timeline, so to speak, and that's the Atlanta Hawks.
Mm-hmm.
You got Trae Young, who is not the same player as Steph Curry, but he is as important to the Hawks, I would say, as Curry is to the Warriors, probably already right now in his young career.
Right.
You have John Collins, who's very, very talented, big man who can stretch the floor. He had a big three the other night to clinch the playoff win for the Atlanta Hawks. I think that was a very timely shot. It was very much needed, and it had a little bit of weight to it. You got guys like DeAndre Hunter, you got Cam Reddish on this team, kind of your versatile two-way perimeter players, and Kevin Huerter is a great shooter. You got Bogdanovich, who was supposed to be a Buck, now he's a Hawk, and that turned out to be a good acquisition. Clint Capella is a walking 20-20 rebounds a night, maybe 20 points a game. I'll say a walking 10 and 20. How about that? Onyeka Okongwu, the young rookie waiting in the wings, possibly to replace him, if not play alongside him at some point. I mean, they got so much depth. Danilo Gallinari's on this team. We forget because he's been injured. Lou Williams is on this team, not really doing a whole lot because you can't play him and Young on the floor at the same time because it's just a defensive nightmare. But overall, I'm looking forward to this team next season. The big thing on this team coming into the year was, do they keep John Collins? How do they match his contract? And there was the whole rumor that he and Trey didn't like each other. They get rid of their old coach. They bring in Nate McMillan. And all of a sudden they look like they can play together. So they're probably going to sign him long term, which it actually lines up pretty well due to the expiring contracts of Tony Snell and Lou Williams of about $20 million. So you're not really going to lose a lot there. So moving forward, how do they draft? How do they build? It looks like Atlanta could be a very dangerous team next season. And Austin, I'll add this. As much as I love Trae Young, he's not on my All-NBA team. How much fire do you think Trae Young comes in next season after another underappreciated year where he's up there in terms of league leaders and assists, up there in terms of points per game? He's a very, very talented player, but guard is a hard position to crack in the NBA, even in the Eastern Conference this year. So you have an underappreciated Trae Young, a developing, deep, loaded team in Atlanta, and a great head coach. Yes, I said a great head coach in Nate McMillan.
You know, Steven, you didn't even mention DeAndre Hunter or Cam Reddish.
I did. I mentioned them.
Did you mention Hunter?
I did. I mentioned both of them. I said that they're two versatile, two-way wing players on the team.
Sorry, I must have.
There was a lot in there. There was a lot in there.
Yep, but you know, you hit everything that I would have hit on for sure too. Then you know they're like you said, they're a loaded and deep young team that has already shown flashes of how good they can be.
Yeah, and that's why I picked them as the team to watch for next season. So, Austin, that wraps up the show on both the radio and now the podcast. So before we cut out of here, just want to turn the floor over to you. Let the folks know anything that you have going on, where they can find you, so forth.
You can find me here every twice a week with you on Breaking the Game. You can check out all my work at Off the Ball Network. I just posted my all NBA teams. I am working on a couple of projects for this summer. I'm thinking about doing a piece on some awards that I kind of came up with on my own. Some team awards too that I came up with on my own that I think are going to be pretty fun. So whenever that's done, I'll let you guys know and you can check that out. But you know, like I always say, go to Off the Ball Network and take a look at everything we have there, because there's a boatload of talented guys and people putting out stuff that you don't want to miss.
Absolutely. And as for myself, you can go to offtheballnetwork.com. Austin and I both have our All NBA teams up there. You can expect an Off the Ball Network exclusive list of All NBA teams combined, because a lot of us are coming out and putting up our All NBA teams now. I have my coaching prediction of whose seat is warming up, and you know, I think that's a pretty significant good list, other than I didn't have Nate Bjorkgren, but who knew type thing. But before we get out here, Austin, just want to remind everybody that they can get 20% off and free shipping with code BTG at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com, and use promo code BTG. Unlock your confidence, and as always, use the right tools for the job with Manscaped. But Austin, man, it's been an honor and a pleasure as always to link up with you and talk the game out the way we do. I really value our conversation, man.
Me too, man. It's always a lot of fun. It's always a good time, and I feel like I always learn something every time I listen to you talk.
Well, I appreciate that, man. So, all right, we'll let the people go. Thank you, everyone, so much for tuning in for, you know, the Breaking the Game show, whether you listen to us on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio, the podcast, or both. Please just tell your friends where they can find us, and we'll catch up with y'all next time. Much love, everybody.
Have a good one.